Ignition sequence start.
Good morning. Welcome to a view of the International Space Station Flight Control Room. This is the Orbit 2 team of flight controllers monitoring operation of the station's systems and assisting the Expedition 62 crew members as they finish up their Friday, looking ahead to a weekend of house cleaning, family conferences, exercise, and time off duty. Now, the team is in a different control room than usual. That's part of NASA's plan to keep facilities here disinfected to protect the team members. I'm in a different spot too. It's part of the same plan. But the mission on orbit proceeds apace. Here's what happened this week.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Isidro Reyna. As we work to slow the spread of coronavirus here on Earth, 3 humans continue critical work on board the International Space Station. The Bartolomeo platform was robotically removed from the trunk of the SpaceX Dragon cargo vehicle. Named for the younger brother of Christopher Columbus, the platform has the capability to host external payloads in low Earth orbit. Bartolomeo offers the station's only unobstructed view both towards planet Earth and into outer space. Application areas include, but are not limited to, Earth observation, robotics, material science, and astrophysics. The Expedition 63 crew arrived at the launch site in Kazakhstan this week, counting down to an April 9th liftoff to the station. NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy shared how he and the crew are staying safe from coronavirus prior to launch.
Well, interestingly enough, the preparation has been no different, and the quarantine for us as crew members has been very similar to what I'm used to for quarantine. The real weird part is everybody else being in quarantine also, and sort of the social distancing concept is not just pertaining to the 3 crew members, but it's everybody. And then the other part that's not so operational, but more on the support side, is trying to navigate through all the uncertainties of which people will get to come to launch, friends, family, NASA support personnel, all that kind of stuff has been quite dynamic, as I'm sure you've been experiencing in your own life over the last 7 days.
One thing astronauts have to be good at: living in confined spaces for long periods of time. 2 veteran astronauts recently shared tips to succeed in self-isolation as we practice social distancing worldwide. Veteran NASA astronaut Scott Kelly, who completed a historic 340-day mission aboard the space station in 2016, shared a few tips in a recent op-ed published in the New York Times. Kelly recommends you follow a schedule, pace yourself, go outside, and consider getting a hobby. Kelly stated, "You will find maintaining a plan will help you and your family adjust to a different work and home life environment." Veteran NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, who spent a total of 665 days in space, also shared her own tips on CBS This Morning. For those working and parenting from home, Whitson noted it's important to understand the bigger purpose to give you reason and rationale for continuing to put up with the situation. Whitson recommends working on communicating with the people you're living with to maximize your time at home. Keep sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll see you next week.
The Expedition 62 crew members are 3 weeks away from their scheduled return to Earth, and that's going to end a 272-day-long flight for Drew Morgan. He's a guy who had to know a lot about a lot of different subjects to graduate from West Point, and then to become a doctor, and then to become an astronaut when he had to know some of it in Russian. We found out that he can also think fast on his feet when he had fun with a rapid-fire Q&A here in Houston before he launched to space last July.
The clock has started. Roger.
What's your favorite movie? Band of Brothers.
Your favorite food?
Anything spicy.
Favorite color?
Olive drab.
Are you a morning person or a night person?
Definitely a morning person. I'm not demonstrating that very well now, but yes, I am a morning person.
What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Mint chocolate chip.
Is there one thing you have in your fridge all the time?
Milk.
What accomplishment are you most proud of?
My kids.
Who's the person who makes you laugh the most?
My wife.
What's your most memorable career moment?
Graduating from Ranger School and being promoted to Major on the same day.
If you could have one superpower only, what would it be?
Time travel.
What's your favorite pizza topping?
Lots and lots of cheese.
Your favorite animal?
Armadillo.
Favorite dance move?
Air guitar.
Who inspires you?
My dad.
What would you like to be remembered for?
Being a good husband and father.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Be a good team player.
What would be a good theme song for your life?
Live It Well by Switchfoot.
If you could spend one day on Mars, what would you do there for fun?
Take pictures.
What is a life goal you plan to achieve this year?
Come home safely from space.
Now, one priority of International Space Station science research is to learn as much as possible about how the human body is affected by living in space. Shortly before she came home last year, flight engineer Anne McLean and her crewmates wrapped up data gathering on the airway monitoring experiment, which examines an astronaut's exhaled breath for signs of inflammation. They're gathering data that will be rolled into the design of future spaceships to make them safer for their human crew members.
The International Space Station is a national orbiting laboratory. Every single day we are answering big questions about Earth and about space, about where we came from and about where we're going. One category of those experiments are human research, experiments on our human body, how we react in microgravity. One of the recent ones that I've been a part of is called airway monitoring, and this is looking at airway inflammation up in space. So when we're breathing the air, you know, the small particles in the air, they don't just fall to the ground like dust on the ground. So we tend to inhale more fine particles than we would on Earth. And so we're looking at our response, our body's response to that by measuring nitric oxide exhalations as an indicator for airway inflammation. And so understanding, you know, how clean does our air need to be? How does our body react to the air? When we talk about going back to the moon, you know, a lot of people are aware that the moon dust is a very, very fine particle. It's almost like a powdered sugar fine particle. And if that's in the air and we're breathing that for months on end, if we're doing, you know, extended stays on the lunar surface, you know, we need to understand kind of how that affects the human body.
The scientists who imagine and create experiments like airway monitoring devote years to getting their experiment just right before they then hand them over to somebody to launch them into space, where the station crew members have the responsibility to execute the protocols. What happens then after the experiment's results come back to Earth? In this final episode of the new NASA Explorers series, take a look as the scientists carry their research across the finish line.
So this is Emil. He is almost 8 months old now, and he was present for a lot of the testing that we did. He was also present for the launch in utero. And so over the course of our first ISS project, we made an entire new human along with all the other testing that we did. And this flight suit that he's wearing was from his Auntie Power Stew that we got when we were down at Cape Canaveral for the launch in December. I know, that's my favorite face he makes right now. This is gonna be top teeth. So we were running concurrent experiments on Earth and on station. So NanoRacks had gels at their facility, and they were getting the data from the experiments running on station. And so we were looking at how the gels formed, their structure, and also how the drug release profile was changing given those two different environments.
NanoRacks brought the plates back to us, and we all made sure that we are here, and we opened the plates all together, and we had the same type of excitement that we had at Kennedy Space Center.
It was already exciting because space never loses its cool, and so we had these plates where, oh my god, these are what the astronauts touched. And so we opened them, and they've been to space and back, and now they're in our lab.
We could just at least look at them and see like how the integrity is different, if the structural changes are something that we can observe just by looking at the gel.
And when we looked at the data that we got from the equipment on station and the equipment from NanoRacks, we could see that there are differences in the drug release profiles from those gels that were happening at the same time.
We actually observed some interesting changes that we hope that we will be able to prove doing actual structural tests and more in-depth studies. But just by observation, it seemed like there might be some changes.
While the thrill of the rocket launch may be over, Elaine and Paris-Stu still have one of the most exciting parts of their journey ahead, publishing their results. This information could help inform future research on Earth and in space.
What we're working on now is compiling on that data and telling a good story around it so that it's something that we can, of course, publish and give back to the public. So we got some really interesting data from these experiments that were, again, super simple, but the story it might tell us could really inform material science as a whole.
You definitely feel a huge responsibility performing this research for others because you know how many years they've been working on the ground, and we often like to know the results. So personally, I stayed in touch with a lot of the scientists, and that gives us a lot of good feedback, and it gives us some closure too to know how important the science that we were doing up there really was.
I think Rachel has something for you guys.
Yeah.
Is it for real?
When they told me they were doing this, they said, hey, we'd like to try and set up at least a FaceTime call or something. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. This is great.
Oh, this is a fantastic surprise.
Where are you guys located?
So we're in our laboratory in Richmond, Virginia. So our other full-time employees are also women. So we're an entirely women-run company.
Fantastic.
It just turned out that way, but it's been wonderful because we're all women engineers.
Oh, hello.
This is our joint.
This is great. This is great.
Show you the plate that you'd handled in space.
We still have it. We still have our samples.
Oh, that's so cool. Man. See, and it's even neat when we get to see the science back down in your hands, too. So sometimes it does go literally in a black box when we're up there, and we hope everything goes down safely. So, but thanks for letting me invade your space a little bit today, and good luck with everything you guys do scientifically, personally, professionally in the future.
All right. Thank you so much, Serena.
Cool. Yeah. All right.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. And happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah, it's hard to beat this.
Oh, I'm trying to think of anything that would be better than watching my own launch of research to the space station.
I actually have, like, my background of my cell phone is actually like the picture of us sending the product to the space station. Definitely a lot of people are surprised that young females in STEM have, this type of experiences and have contributed this much. I still look at the sky and I really think everything is so far away, and look at the stars and everything looks like nothing is achievable, but then just being a part of this whole experience, it just is a dream come true.
Elaine and Paris-Stu now join the thousands of scientists who've performed research aboard the International Space Station, making the most of what microgravity has to teach us. This dedicated group is bringing what they learn back to Earth, helping improve lives and advance exploration.
What Space Station gives us is a different sort of laboratory, and what's really meaningful to me is to be able to come back down and talk with my patients and let them know about some of the discoveries we made. This means a lot to me as a clinician, and so it was really neat to be able to perform that sort of science on station. The energy that everyone has who's involved in space research is extremely contagious, and so you just get hyped up about it because everyone else is so excited about it. Yes, the timelines are long, but everyone is so positive and certain that they're doing a good thing and that the money is well spent, and that is what drives people to keep doing this sort of research.
Microgravity still has more insights to reveal, and this laboratory, like no other, will continue to uncover them, one experiment at a time.
The space travelers of today and those of tomorrow have at least one thing in common with explorers of old. They are all at the mercy of the weather. The astronauts and the systems of their future space vehicles will have to be protected from the radiation of deep space. And that's why today's scientists are working hard to improve our ability to accurately forecast dangerous space weather.
The space we travel through. Presented by Science at NASA. When seafaring nations began to explore new regions of the world, one of their biggest concerns in making the journey safely was how to cope with weather. They could harness the wind for power. They could rely on the sun and the stars for navigation. They could build sturdy ships. But if a storm rose suddenly, they were at nature's mercy. More than 5 centuries later, our nation is once again on the cusp of exploring new worlds. And once again, one of our concerns about traveling long distances is the weather, space weather. While space is a vacuum, it's not 100% empty. Particles, energy, and magnetic fields travel through the void. Much of these emanate from the sun's corona, as part of a constant outward flow known as the solar wind, which stretches well beyond the orbit of Neptune. There are also high-energy particles or cosmic rays in the mix, which travel vast distances from dying stars or supernovae. Earth's magnetic field and relatively thick atmosphere act as a shield against the most harmful forms of this radiation, but in space, there is no such deterrent. If we want to travel through this space, we need ways to protect our astronauts. These particles can affect our technology, tripping onboard electronics. Dr. Yari Calatavega, space weather scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, notes, "We are working hard to forecast when these particles will be at their peak, such as during solar flares or coronal mass ejections. Acute exposure to these solar energetic particles is a serious concern for astronauts and instruments. Therefore, having a better understanding of when to expect solar activity is important for safely sending our astronauts and spacecraft through space. Ironically, such space weather activity can actually protect against another threat to astronauts. The sun's activity can block dangerous cosmic rays coming from other stars, which are constantly present, illustrating the complexity of the system NASA tries to understand and mitigate for our space travelers. Over time, sea captains learned when to sail their ships and when to stay in harbor, based on their accumulated knowledge of the weather. It's more risky to be on the water in the Caribbean during hurricane season, and you'd want to consider avoiding the northeast coast of America during the height of winter. Dr. Calatavega says, "It's very similar to what we're doing today. We're constantly developing and testing new models to predict space weather, and we're constantly seeking new data to refine those models. A host of heliophysics missions observe space from a variety of vantage points, not unlike terrestrial weather sensors, which work in tandem to paint a bigger picture of our space environment." In August 2018, NASA launched the Parker Solar Probe to help us better understand the sun's activity, especially what drives the solar wind and how energetic particles get accelerated. This data could be used to improve models of space weather forecasting, ultimately helping us find new and better ways to shield our spacecraft and protect our astronauts. Whether it was the oceans ancient ships traveled through, or the space we will one day travel through, we know this: keeping a watchful eye on the environment around us is key to ensuring safe passage. For more information about what matters in space, visit science.nasa.gov.
The effort to put Americans out into deep space, starting with returning astronauts to the moon in just a few years, is making progress all across the country. Take a look at some of the recent milestones of the Artemis program as they get the Orion spacecraft and the Space Launch System rocket and the Exploration Ground Systems infrastructure all in place for the next giant leap. The astronauts who will complete the journeys of the Artemis program will start each of those missions with an opportunity that most human beings don't ever get, to see the planet Earth from above. It's an experience that's been transformative for many of those lucky enough to have been there. Canadian astronaut David St. Jacques had his first wide-angle view of Earth in December 2018, but he remembers it like it was yesterday.
Launching to space, of course, was a momentous experience, but oddly enough, it was quite familiar because of all the training we had. So those 10 minutes in the capsule riding the Soyuz rocket, there was the vibration, the pressure, the acceleration, the pressure in your seat. But after those 8 minutes of busy time and hyper awareness, if you want, of our environment, is when I had my first view of the Earth from space. The launch was at dusk, so quickly we entered penumbra and into night. And by the time we reached orbit, it was pitch black outside, and shortly thereafter came our first orbital sunrise during the rendezvous to ISS. And I will never forget that sight, the thin blue line of the atmosphere, the curve of the horizon. That's when it became real, really at a gut level. I'm actually in space. We are on orbit. This is not a sim. Because your mind tends to go the reassuring route of pretending it's just a game. But no, that this is reality. We are in space and orbit. And that view, that sunrise, I'll never forget that. Through the crummy little side window of the Soyuz, still just amazing. It's like burned in my memory. I, of course, spent a lot of time at the cupola, looking at the Earth. And what has always struck me every time I went there is how beautiful the Earth is, how fragile it looks, how alive it obviously is, with the clouds, the water. It's like it's breathing. The auroras, the presence of humans at night, it's obvious with the lights. But is the death around the Earth that's startling. How this beautiful, shining oasis of life is there naked in the middle of pitch black death, the vacuum of space. And then there's the dance of the celestial bodies around. The moon is there, but the moon is just a rock. The sun is just a ball of fire. And here's the Earth, this perfect oasis. So even though I knew this abstractly, like everybody does now, we have all seen those images, to see it with your own eyes, you develop that sense of awe. And also, you cannot go to space and continue, if you were, thinking that resources are infinite. They're obviously not. It's in your face. It's a finite system, a closed loop system. There's no new air, no new water that gets to Earth, ever. It's all recycled and has been for billions of years. And it is perfectly balanced and perfectly matched to our needs. We are matched to her. That concrete realization that we belong to Earth and not vice versa, it's kind of a mental shift to see that we just nowhere else we could go. We can talk about colonizing other planets, but you know, kind of smarter and cheaper to just take care of Earth as she is. So that was very endearing, that vision. And I can close my eyes and always go back to the cupola looking at the planet. And that blue line, it's unbelievable. It makes the Earth look alive. She's glowing. Well, the little bubble we live in is tiny. And that was very, in a way, sobering perspective to get. How fragile, unique, and just sacred, really, our spaceship Earth is, and the responsibility we have to be good shepherds of her. It is the home of billions of humans and billions of other species, completely autonomous in the vacuum of space. It's just a miracle. You want to protect her because it is our only spacecraft. the whole of us. We're all astronauts living in the deadly vacuum of space, kept alive by this beautiful, perfect machine.
Like to get another look at that feature or any of the other stories we showed you today? And who could blame you? Check us out on YouTube and Facebook. There are the addresses, and be sure to look around because there are lots of other features you'd like to see about NASA and America's human spaceflight program. Going to be out on the internet anyway? Check out Houston We Have a Podcast, where we talk to folks about their work in all aspects of space exploration. New episodes post every Friday. And today, as NASA presses ahead with Project Artemis missions that'll take us back to the moon, Gary Jordan talks with the specialists here in Houston who have just opened, for the first time, samples of lunar material that were brought back on Apollo 17 in 1972. Go to nasa.gov/podcasts for today's episode. It's also where you'll find all of the other previous episodes and the full library of all of the NASA podcasts, all of which you can also listen to on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud.